And I don't know if they're putting your title up, but just to formally introduce you, you're, yes,
Oh,
Nicola
it's
Acutt,
there in bold.
Vice President of Sustainability at VMware. And this is sort of a nice compliment because we had one of your colleagues this morning giving a presentation about how to feed Paris, sort of looking at some of these issues of sustainability from a little bit different perspective, maybe sort of a more, as you might say, a more macro urban perspective. Today we want to talk with you a little bit more specifically about VMware and your position. So I guess the first question would be to just tell us a little bit about what is specifically your job when we talk about sustainability at VMware.
What on earth I do in an enterprise software company?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, hello everyone. Well, you know, I describe myself as a social entrepreneur. In other words, an entrepreneur working inside a large company. And my job is to create impact and change from a social and environmental perspective. So I'm really an undercover change agent.
But your job is to do that within the company versus trying to convince me to recycle or something like
Absolutely.
that. You're focused on your colleagues, what they're doing.
Absolutely. And it's really about, you know, sustainability is a big concept, right? And I think one of the challenges we have is language and defining what that means. And I think you can get into these circular discussions about what sustainability is. And the way that I describe it in its most simplest terms is it's way more than recycling.
Yeah.
It is actually about resilience. When you think about what it really means, it's about the long-term capacity to endure. So when you apply that to a business context, it's about the capacity of the organization to endure. And by definition, that means understanding the environment around which you operate.
Right. And speaking of that, so, you know, there's VMware, but obviously it's just a piece of this sort of larger phenomenon of data centers and the internet and all the infrastructure that it takes to power this. And I think there had been, you know, in the past decade, a growing recognition of the impact that was having. Can you give me a little context, just not just VMware, but in general? You know, we were looking at data centers. What do we think? Do we have a handle on just now how much of an impact we're having? And is it accelerating? Is it sort of moderating?
That's a great question. And you know, I think it's an ongoing challenge, right? And we look at all of the trends in technology and IT. That demand curve is going in one direction, right? But let me pause for a second and talk about, you know, there was at one point some studies done and looking at, you know, whether or not we would have enough power to generate the capacity. And there's been some interesting work by the Lawrence Berkeley lab. And something I find really interesting and something I'm really proud of, and VMware's role in all of this, and as you know, the company that found or created virtualization. And obviously the software, the technology wasn't designed for sustainability, but that is one of the benefits. And you know, you can think of it as the company that's created the biggest positive externality in the world. And last year we were finally able to quantify just what that impact was. So we worked with the IDC to do a piece of research to look at that footprint of VMware's customers. And as you know, it's huge, right? Yeah. And not surprised. Well, to be honest, I knew it was going to be a big number, but the final results blew me away. Over the last 13 years, the collective impact of VMware's customers has been the result of avoiding 340 million metric tons of CO2 going into the atmosphere, which that's a huge number, right? So yeah. How do you get your head around it? And we did a conversion, and it's roughly about the equivalent of avoiding the same emissions from 43% of US households for a year.
Wow, that's a big number.
It's a big number.
So let's talk about then how you do that, because as I understand it, you're not just wandering around the halls at VMware saying, hey guys, you know, don't forget to use recycled toilet paper and you know, think of the planet. I mean, you have a more core responsibility. You're in the CTO office. Yep. You're involved at a product level. So talk a little bit about why it was structured like that and how that kind of functions within the company.
Yeah, sure. And there's actually a story to that. And you know, VMware is a company that from the very beginning, from the days of the founders, Mendel and Diane, They personally valued sustainability. So they made the decision early on to build a campus in Palo Alto, and they hired one of the world's leading green architects to do it. So we have this phenomenal campus that is, just in a way, is an outward expression of these sustainability values. And so the company did all the right things, recycling in the office and this beautiful campus. But for many years, there wasn't a formal strategy around sustainability. And about 2 years ago, we worked on this, recognizing that there's an opportunity for us to help enable our customers further. And so that was part of this piece of work, to look at how do we take sustainability to the next level, right? And go beyond the operational efficiency, go beyond doing the right things in the office to have a bigger impact. And frankly, that's what we realized. The biggest impact that we could have is through our technology. And so that's the reason why we decided to put a focus on sustainability and to lead with product and lead with what we can do through software.
And does that, again, like the economic case would seem obvious to me in that sense, that if you build products that use less energy, they cost less for you, they cost less for the customer, so that's a win for everybody. Environment aside, if you can make it less expensive, that's great. But does it go sort of beyond that in terms of how you're designing it or how you're thinking about trying to build sustainability goals in, or is that really the driving force that sort of makes this, sort of a passion within the company?
Absolutely, and in fact, that was exactly kind of the spirit behind us looking at what we were doing and questioning, asking the what if. What if we could do more? What would that look like? And there's a concept that I really like. It's this idea of net positive. So, the sustainability work, and people like me whose careers have been dedicated to this kind of work have gone through a journey, right? In the early days, it was about environmental compliance, and even before that, it was about philanthropy, right? That's what companies did to be good or to give back. And then it was about environmental compliance and corporate social responsibility, and then sustainability. And the thinking now is, how do we go beyond doing less bad and actually do more good? So the concept of net positive. And I would argue that what VMware's been able to accomplish falls into that category when you look at our operational footprint from an energy perspective, just from an energy perspective. It's a drop in the ocean compared to the amount of efficiency gains that we can help our huge customer base.
And then internally, when you're going through exercises of, your job is to sort of advocate and keep those front and center. People are doing product design, people are doing marketing and thinking about the global perspective on these things. Is it a battle to make sure that stays front and center throughout that process, or do you feel like it's kind of been absorbed, I guess, into everybody's DNA, which would be the sort of aspirational goal that everybody is thinking about this?
I think, let's be honest, right? It's an ongoing process, right? And when you start something new, there's always a culture shift that has to be made. And so, I think about the opportunity that sustainability represents for the business. And there is the product dimension, which, being able to integrate sustainability features into the things that we offer. But then there's also the process through which our engineers develop the software, and the opportunities for efficiencies in that are also part of sustainability. So ultimately, the goal is, and it is an aspiration, but the goal is to create a culture of sustainability where we're thinking about R&D and innovation, and have a culture, just as we have a culture around quality and performance and security. The aspiration is to develop a culture of sustainability in our product development process.
Now, we've seen, particularly in Silicon Valley, and I think this is a great thing in general, more companies talk publicly about the need to do this. Facebook talking about their data center designs, Google, Apple obviously makes a lot of noise about this, both in terms of product impact, its new headquarters, that's sort of, speaking of big headquarters in Silicon Valley. Do you guys, and you personally, do you see that as a sort of a competitive thing, or is it a collegial thing in terms of, because at the end of the day, I mean, you take any one of these companies, as large as they are, they're still a small piece of the larger impact of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I think of it is this friendly co-opetition, right? Because yes, we're in a market, and some of us are competitors, and others we're collaborators, or we're partners. And so in my my professional circles, we actually have in Silicon Valley, we have a group of us who meet regularly. And some of the professionals around this table are our competitors, but there's a spirit, it's certainly in the group that I'm part of the bigger picture, and that we are part of something bigger, and our mission and goal is to help our companies be as successful as possible and as sustainable as possible, but wherever possible, to collaborate with each other, to share information, so that we can move the industry forward.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of both.
Yeah, and in that vein, I mean, from the VMware piece of it, I mean, is it open in the sense that you can talk about openly, more specifically than what we have time to do here, obviously, but in terms of how you're accomplishing the goals, to share those so that others kind of, maybe not in an open source fashion completely, but you publish them, or you share them, or how does that work, or is it really like a sort of protected secret?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you're talking about, or what particular initiative.
Like let's, for instance, in a product development sense,
Yeah.
if you've done certain things that cut the usage, make things more efficient, have an impact on usage, are you at liberty to go out and say, hey, we solved this huge problem, here's the key, and talk about that, or does it really depend on what we're...
Yeah, I mean, I think it would depend on a specific product or a specific feature, but in general, we certainly share the process. And in this particular working group that I'm part of heads of sustainability, peer companies in Silicon Valley, we share our lessons learned and our failures with each other as leaders in the space. Again, in that spirit of trying to drive the movement, if you like, forward. Yeah. So it's a bit of both.
Yeah, that's great. Well, for those who have not heard, we have a new president in the United States who recently made a pretty headline-grabbing decision related to the environment, to begin the process of taking us out of the Paris Treaty. Yeah. We heard from a lot of tech companies, particularly a lot of companies in general in the U.S., but the tech sector in particular. Can you talk a little bit about how that impacted you and how VMware reacted to that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I'm really proud of, to be honest. Immediately on Thursday last week, we put a statement out to our employees, and our e-staff were engaged immediately, and there was no doubt whatsoever that we were going to keep our commitments, and we were going to double down on our stated goals, which include setting a science-based target for our carbon emissions and to achieve carbon neutrality and 100% renewable energy by 2020. And there was not a single hesitation that we are standing fast on that commitment. Yeah. And in fact, and following the internal announcement to our employees, we've now put that out publicly as well. That's so great. I think, look, it's a disappointment to many of us, and I think there's been a lot of commentary on it, and ultimately, I think the markets will drive this, and I think you're seeing it already with the rapid rise of the renewable energy market. The business case is there; it just makes sense. So for us, it's a no-brainer, right? Yeah. And obviously, it'd be different, and I think it would make things easier to have our federal government leading the charge, but that's not going to change, and I think it's not going to stop the progress.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, often this area is talked about as a cost, the cost of protecting the environment, the money it takes, the increase in resource, et cetera, et cetera. And really, the dynamic in general we're describing here is that, in fact, there's a short-term potential bottom line cost saving for the company, for the customers, but also, an opportunity that is created by investing in these things that often somehow seems not to be counted in that calculation when we're debating not even just the Paris Treaty, but environmental policy and regulation in general.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a challenge that we've had over, and when I say we, I mean sustainability professionals over the years, is framing that business case, because oftentimes these investments require a longer time horizon than quarterly results.
Right.
So it's this balance, right? And figuring out how do you make long-term investments, and there's more and more research that shows that companies that invest in this area over the long term outperform those that don't.
Yeah.
And so I think you see all the leading companies get it, right? The executive C-suite really understand that this is a business issue that has multiple dimensions.
Yeah.
There's an operational efficiency dimension, and I don't think we can discount the culture dimension and the importance to employees that are part of what I call a global citizenry,
Yeah.
that actually really care about these issues,
Yeah.
and expect the companies that they work for to have a position, to have a point of view,
Yeah, yeah.
and to lead.
Yeah. Plus, just having a habitable planet must be good.
Well,
for,
that
must count
helps.
for
We all
something.
kind of need to breathe, don't
Yes.
we?
Well, listen, thank you very much. We're out of time. Thank you all for sticking around, and we will move it back to our host.
Thank you. Pleasure.